I was thinking that, because they're by Indian writers, of course, we have many cultures, but
Yeah.
uh, there's an Indian, I mean, there's a specific tone and there's a specific, like, I mean, you get it, right? And one isn't saying that one doesn't get science fiction or
Yeah.
speculative fiction, international writers, but there really is a difference. So, according to you, what do you think it is? And so that's why I enjoyed reading this. Suddenly
Yeah.
one feels like, okay,
Yeah.
there's feeling of, you know,
Yeah, I think like it has a lot to do with the very unique hybrid cultural environment in which many of us have come of age.
hmm,
Which is to say that on the one hand, of course, you know, those of us who grew up in English speaking homes with a certain degree of economic and social privilege
hmm,
have always been exposed to the major cultural signposts of the Western world.
yes,
Growing up, for me, it would have been Harry Potter, like a major reference point.
hmm,
Lord of the Rings in fantasy fiction, right?
yes,
And Asimov and Clarke and all of that in science fiction. These
yeah,
writers I may not go back to now for a variety of reasons,
yes,
from like
hmm.
bad politics to like bad writing.
Yeah,
But it was very much you were part of a and are a part of a more international conversation on the one hand, but
yeah,
also, of course, just by osmosis, the Indian myths, whichever myth is prominent in the milieu you're from, those kinds of reference points are also part of your coming of age.
yeah,
Of course, I think something as basic as the names, you know, in a story, uh,
yeah,
will convey a sense of home.
yes,
And so I think like a combination of those things is what would make a story sound distinctively Indian. There is, I think, a certain historical experience that we've had as Indians, a certain belonging to multiple different worlds, without necessarily being fully at home in any of them, and just writing about people that we know
hmm,
that would then I think give these stories the sense of being Indian. I don't think thematically there's any like distinctively Indian theme there because
hmm,
like Indians can write Star Trek, right? So there's
yeah,
no bar over there. But it's just that yeah, like we've grown up in what is in some way a common milieu. Uh,
yes, yeah, and then the references to caste or
yeah,
the change in caste relationships
yeah,
over generations, those sort of things I really found, and also
yeah,
like the totalitarian state or the feeling of the Delhi story, especially,
yeah.
what is it called? Delhi
Delhi circa 50 something.
TNE,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I think that, yeah, I think like, well, so caste for sure. I think the very specific forms patriarchy takes in South Asia in general.
yes,
And I think again, yeah, like you're right in that whereas authoritarian states are a common feature of the world, there
hmm.
is a very specific pathology of authoritarianism that has taken root in a place like India, or I think more broadly in South Asia. In fact, I remember that a couple of years ago for Himal magazine, I did this long piece on Sri Lankan genre fiction. One part of which was exploring Vajra Chandrasekhara's The Saint of Bright
Hmm.
Doors, which was a book that won a bunch of awards,
Hmm.
published a couple of years ago. And
Yes.
one thing that struck me was that there is a very specific kind of almost petty authoritarian, governance mode of just the very low level harassment, and just like again like just the um, physical like beatings that you might get, but not like something at a very high level, but just like as
Yeah.
daily occurrence, right? So this sort of
Yeah.
micro authoritarian governance that then of course feeds into a broader project is I think something that is very distinctively South Asian in its flavor. And again, I
Hmm.
think the stories in the anthology, some of them give you a taste of that very distinctively South Asian flavor of authoritarian, governance. So I think you have a bit of that.
Yeah. And also this story, I think the one where the middle aged woman, uh, who kind of comes into her own. Is it between? No, it's the a rough edge
Tough edge
confection.
confection. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I thought that's like a perfect story of menopause, actually.
yeah. Mm.
you
Yeah,
know,
I mean, yeah,
rebellion at that stage in life.
yeah,
But it's presented through, I don't know, her memories of myth and
yeah,
everything. So it gives it many more levels.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
so, so all these things, I found that quite interesting, and something that one doesn't find in Western, maybe anthologies that one has read or fiction, because
Yeah,
I
I think that like modern Western SF has paved the way for I think some very subtle and interesting explorations of gender, and sexuality and
mm,
so on.
mm,
But of course, you're completely right in that there are specific forms that patriarchy takes here, um,
mm,
and stories written from here would be informed by those forms.
yeah,
You can see a common thread between the explorations in Indian anthology and elsewhere, but there is that distinctively Indian flavor again coming from just that lived experience. Uh,
mm. So I wondered, like, like how we get, because we've been exposed to it, we
yeah,
get Western science fiction. Would they get our science fiction, our speculative fiction? Would they get it? Because there's so many layers which only somebody who is within this cultural milieu
yeah,
gets, right?
yeah.
Unspoken.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting point, and I think this taps into this long-standing debate in modern genre fiction, which is to say that in many ways the so-called, I mean, Western world has achieved a kind of cultural hegemony, right? So
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
read a book like, say, China Miéville's Un London, right, which is
Yes, yes.
or King Rat, you
Hmm.
know those signposts. Like all of us have a map of London in our heads, right? So we know,
Yes.
like we know if someone mentions, some landmark of London, we know what it is. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting because so I've been a reviewer of genre. I've stopped now since I've become a writer myself, but I spent a decade reviewing genre fiction very very frequently. And
Hmm.
one book I reviewed, I think around 5 years ago, was this Nigerian writer Sui Davies Okungba's debut novel called David Mogo God Hunter, which is
Hmm.
set in modern day Nairobi. And it refers to all of these landmarks of Nairobi. And I had to basically open a map of Nairobi when I was reading that book, because when you
Hmm.
say like the triple bridge, what's the image of that, right? So as opposed to Buckingham Palace, right? So
Yeah.
so I did like and it really added, so because obviously like he wasn't going to explain because he shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
It's on the reader then to say, okay, I will sit with an atlas next to me and just like cross reference so I can get a visual image of the events of this novel. And I think like what you're seeing now is a growing realization amongst the at least the dedicated Western readers, that this is their responsibility. So they have to actually make the effort to acquaint themselves with the milieu of a particular story or a novel. Of course, it'll never be perfect, but what I do see is that willingness to make the effort. So, for example, this anthology was reviewed very favorably in Locus magazine, which is the predominant US genre fiction magazine.
Yeah.
And there was a fantastic review. Of course, there was critique, and there was also praise. And I should be the case of the review. And of course, an anthology has to be like, people will like or dislike different stories. But there was an engagement with what was going on. And I think that, I think again, there's a long way to go because the default is very much, London, New York, those kinds of places as settings. Um, and of course the preoccupations of the people there. So I think that's still very much the default, and that will remain the default for the foreseeable future because that's where publishing power is, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately you have to convince a US or a UK literary agent and a US or a UK publisher that this is worth, publishing if you want to really have a global audience. So I think that will remain. I do see, however, that it's changing in a way that it wasn't earlier. So there is much more
Hmm.
openness to engaging with non-Western SF on its own terms. The explosion of Chinese science fiction has played a part in that for sure. Uh,
Mm.
the explosion of Afrofuturism, I think, again has played a big part in that. And yeah, like so, I mean, a couple of years ago, there was this whole debate about italicizing certain words, right? So
Yes,
if I
yes.
say sari or roti, do I have to italicize them to show that this is a different language word in an English language
Mm.
story? And the
Mm.
consensus was that no, I mean, this is as much a part of English now, as is any other word, because English is not the preserve of the West. It's very much the language of the colonies, for
Yes.
or worse, right? So now most writers do not writers writing from African countries or Indian writers will not italicize specific words, but they'll just be there, and then it's up to the reader to make the effort. Just recently, I was reading Bora Chung's
Mhm.
book because we have a conversation on 10th of Jan as part of a
Okay.
Korea India exchange, uh,
Mm.
and um, and in the first story, there's reference to the word sunbae, Sunbae. I had no
Mm.
idea, what is this word? And so finally, I had to go and Google it, and it's your senior colleague. But there was no italics, nothing. It was just there, like as if you were saying colleague. So I
Mm.
think that's you see a lot more of that now in writing from outside of the US and the UK, which is clearly on its own terms and expecting the reader to make the effort then to come and meet you where you are.